the Bible's very clear that we are born into sin, and I don't buy that. I don't. So I don't. I understand why it's there, because the writers. I'm not saying God. I'm saying the writers needed people to sign on to their religion. That's what they needed. If you look at that book, you've got Jesus that talks about how the meek shall inherit the earth. And I understand that the definition of meek is different than what it's put forth in the King James Version. The old school language defines someone as meek as someone who has power but chooses not to exercise that power. And that individual will inherit the earth. The way that meek is presented these days in the text is someone who is weak. The weak shall inherit the earth. And that doesn't, let's be honest, it doesn't make much fucking sense to say that. All right? It doesn't. The argument that I'm trying to put forth, that I'm talking about today, goes back to that idea of whether the text is divinely inspired. If it is divinely inspired, if, as some of the people who were arguing with me, if that text is simply dictated to the writers, then that means that that text is infallible, that every single thing in it is true and it cannot be questioned. All right? That's what that means. Now, do we believe that every single thing in the Bible is true? Well, if you do, let's talk about Genesis. Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2.
I was going to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
Back then, I mean, it was so long ago. Do you think that writing was a skill that not a lot of people had?
That's really interesting. So what's kind of interesting is the Gospels were written somewhere between 45 to 95 years after Christ or Jesus died, okay? So up until that point, and we've got this whole tradition of an oral narrative, okay, from the Sumerians all the way through tribal, even the Greeks at one point, their history was passed down through oral tradition. Now, that does not mean that the oral tradition was not preserved. It absolutely was. But at the same time, you didn't have a lot of people that were writers that that could write or even read. It wasn't until the advent of the printing press that we had a lot of text that was sent out there. As a matter of fact, what happens is in medieval times, this is really interesting. In medieval times, you didn't have people that could read the Bible. You had the Catholics, and they kept that shit close, all right? But those same Catholics were very good about having miracle plays. For those who don't know what a miracle play is, you have these huge traveling wagons, all right? And they would go into a village or a city or something like that. And inside of the wagon, you had 3 tiers, so 3 stages. And they would unfold the wagon, set everything up. The bottom stage was hell. The middle stage, the second story, was earth. And then the third stage, the top, was heaven. And they would put on a play. All right, a play that would talk about and give the people who could not read, who were very uneducated and ignorant, they would educate people on the ways of the Bible through these plays, these miracle plays. All right, it was later on that people started to read, and for those who may not understand, who may not understand how popular reading was back in the day, think of it as before the cinema industry collapsed after COVID. You've had blockbuster movies. Think about the lines that were formed to watch Star Wars. That's much of the same way it was for many of these writers. When Charles Dickens died, for example, news of his death came to the United States, and there were so many people gathered on the pier to just hear the news that the pier collapsed. All right, reading. It was very, very popular, and what happened is you would have these libraries, and people would you would get the book, and the entire family would gather around, and you would take turns reading. So you didn't have radio and stuff like that. You would have a book, and that became the way that you would entertain each other, is by reading these things. So text becomes very important. Before that, it was word of mouth and that oral tradition that gets carried around. And before the printing press, you had to write that shit down. So
I think a lot of people assume nowadays that everyone had a Bible back then.
Yeah, and they didn't. You did not. I mean, and even if you had the Bible, you wouldn't be able to read the goddamn thing. All right. So the Catholics had a lock on the Bible until this guy named Martin Luther comes around. And Martin Luther comes around, he nails these 95 theses. No, not feces. He nails these.
That's a lot of feces.
I know it's messy, but he nails these 95 theses on the door of the church. And basically what Martin Luther said he said, first of all, anyone can be a preacher. So it doesn't take a priest. And then he says, hey, you don't have to give all your fucking money to the church. And that causes Protestantism to spread like wildfire across Europe, because all of a sudden those kings were like, I don't have to give my money to the church, and I can stay and I can keep it. I still go to heaven. Oh, shit. I sign on to you, man. So that's what happens. All right. That's what happens.
Do they have lowriders?
I love lowriders. A little lowrider church wagon. All right. So looking at Genesis chapter 1. We're going to read through this, and we're going to read over Genesis chapter 2 as well. Why? Because we fucking can. Let's put on my best Bible voice, because we're going to piss a lot of people off on this one. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day. And the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. Dry land is not a myth!
Dry land is not a myth! I've seen it! Kevin Costner, Waterworld.
And it was so. And God called the dry land earth. And the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. And God then said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so, and the earth brought forth grass. And there's a whole list. So I'm not going to continue to read it because it takes a little bit. There's a whole list of the things that was created on those 6 days, because we know that God rested on the seventh. Now, what's interesting, Genesis chapter 2 does that same thing, right? It absolutely does. Genesis chapter 2 starts out saying, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all of the host of them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all of his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day, blah, 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 blah. These are the generations. So what happens is, if you read Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, the order of which things were created differs between chapter 1 and chapter 2. Not only that, but the way that God creates man and woman differs on both of these. And here's what's going to piss people off. Differs on both of these creation myths. Myths. It's different. Now, why is that? Now, there's going to be some people, it's not different. It's not. It's the same. He's just breaking it down. I mean, yeah, well, I mean, who gives a shit if he made the earth first and then the light after that? But, you know, he took the rib out of Adam and he made well, okay, yeah, it says over there he makes them both at the same time. confusing me with the facts. It's different. The order of creation is different, okay? So if you're trying to tell me that the Bible is infallible, that not only was it divinely inspired, but God told the writers exactly what to write down as in dictation, then you're telling me that God screwed up the order of creation between chapters 1 and chapter 2. That's what you're telling me. That doesn't make much sense to me because God is by definition infallible. Man is fallible. So there's some disconnect there because God would not put two creation myths. Now, here's why those are there. Those are there because they appeal to two different demographics of people, one agricultural and another industrial. That's why the order is different. That's why in one creation myth, you have the lands that are built, that are created, then you have the herbs. And I say herb because it's got a fucking H in it. All right. The herbs are there and you've got all of that. Then you've got the other one that is different because it's trying to convince those people who are industrialists to sign on to the text. All right. It gets a little different though as we go through Genesis. Now, from my reading, again, we're all about taking a shit today. In my reading, Cain slew Abel, right? So Cain slays Abel, and then Cain is cast out into the land of Nod, where what happens? Cain is cast out into the land of Nod, where he knew his wife. Who the fuck did Cain marry? Because my reading of Genesis, it's very clear. Adam and Eve were there. They had some rugrats. Okay, they had Cain and Abel. We could even say, if you want to, we can say, well, they had some girls too. Okay, if you want to say that, even though it doesn't mention that. Okay, but Cain's cast out of the Garden of Eden, where everyone else was. And there he finds his wife. Now, he didn't marry a fucking monkey. He didn't marry a goat or a sheep. And I understand that in Minnesota, they had sheep for 30 years before they figured out they could get, wool from them. Cain wasn't like that. He married another human being. Okay? So this idea that the Bible is literal, there's problems with that. Noah's Ark, because we are definitely diving into Genesis today. Noah's Ark. Are you really going to tell me that now a cubit, and from what I understand, it's like 400. The actual dimensions are like maybe 300 feet long for the ark, 150 feet wide. A cubit is the unit of measurement that God dictated to Noah to build the ark. So a cubit is from the tip of your finger to your elbow. That's basically a cubit. All right, and it said the way that God ordered Noah to build the ark was, and I know that most people who have never read the Bible says, well, he takes 2 of every single animal. No, that's not what the fucking book says. The book says that for many of those species of animals, you're going to take 7 of the goddamn things. So 7 elephants, 7 tigers, 7 bears, 7 lions, all that other stuff. It's the unclean animals. I guess the ones who are ugly, like possums, that you're only going to take 2 of those. All right. So are you trying to tell me that in a ship that was 300 feet or 450 feet long by 150 feet wide, and I think 75 feet high, something like that, are you going to tell me that you fit every single species of animal, of bird, of fish in that ship? No, you did not. The problem is that the writers at that point in time, they did not know that you had all these species of animals that were out there. They simply knew the species of animals in their own little circle of the world. And they said, as they were writing it down, oh yeah, Bill, we can fit every one of these motherfuckers in this boat. Let's go ahead and put it in there. 2 of them? Shit, no. 2? Shit. Put 7. Put 7. That way everything's all right. Now we won't worry about how's he going to feed them. Well, shit, I don't know how he's going to feed them. We ain't going to put that in the text. Let them figure that out them damn selves. Nobody gives a shit. We're going to put the story of the flood because everybody, and here's the thing. Yes, a flood happened. How do we know that? Because it's documented from Gilgamesh all the way down through the Bible and things like that. We know there was a great flood in that region of the world at some point. The Epic of Gilgamesh has documentation about a great flood as well. So you've got several different mythologies that reference a great flood at some point in history. So we know that the flood happened, but do we believe literally that Noah, first of all, that Noah built the ark? Do we believe that? Do we believe that Noah single-handedly built the ark? No, by God, he didn't. He had to have a crew of people, probably got a bunch of Mexicans to do it. All right? Because they're cheap labor.
Stopped by Home Depot on the way there.
Stopped by Home Depot. God, pulled up in his little Noah pickup truck. Hey, God told me to build a boat. How many people want to work today? And they're like, ASA! And they loaded up. They all went and built the ark. So it took a crew people to do that. And we do not believe that every single animal fit in there because there's simply too many animals. So there's and it's not just Genesis. There's if you look at the 10 Commandments, God in one chapter in Exodus says, do not kill. And then 3 pages over, he tells everybody to go into the land of Canaan and slay every motherfucker that's there. All right, because God pulled bullshit like that in the Old Testament. God in the Old Testament is not the same God that's in the New Testament. God in the New Testament is the happy-go-lucky God that's like, oh, everything's fine. Love will conquer all. In the Old Testament, God's like, I'm going to slay every motherfucker that ever walked the earth. You son of a bitches need it. That's the Old Testament God. All right, so there's a difference. The thing is that God, by definition, is unchanging. So that Old Testament God, that vengeful God, is a product of the writers. There's a reason that if you look and read the Quran, Muslims are very good about not personifying God. They do not give God a gender. They do not attribute emotions to God. All right, because those things are man-made. Those things apply to man. Those are what makes man imperfect. God is a perfect being. Genderless, emotionless, God is there. Yes, God is good, but do not personify God. The Muslims are very good about that. And I actually kind of adopt that idea of God myself. I don't view God as a man or a woman. I don't view God as vengeful, of having emotions, of envious, of jealous. In the Old Testament, I'm a jealous God. No, I don't think that at all. One of the interesting things is on that short where everyone was raising hell, I had a guy that was arguing the divineness of the Bible, and the way he argued it is he said, well, look at the Quran. Even the Quran says that, Jesus was real. And I'm like, dude, I'm not arguing that Jesus was real, but did you just use the Quran to support the Bible? Because the Quran's very clear in saying that Jesus was not the Son of God. I did not get a response on that. I did not. But we're talking about, I take a, and I don't want people to think that I'm some sort of authority. I'm not, okay? I'm simply trying to find my own faith. I am. And I've been struggling with faith most of my life.